My name is Claire Henderson. I'm 31 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I have a golden retriever named Biscuit, who believes he is the main character of every room he enters. And until 14 months ago, I genuinely believed I had the most boring, predictable, wonderfully unremarkable family on the entire planet. Let me paint you a picture of who I am, because I think it matters for everything that comes after. I'm the girl who makes her bed every single morning, even on weekends, even when she's exhausted, even when every logical part of her brain says just leave it. I meal prep on Sundays. I keep a running list of books I want to read organized by genre. When I go to Target for one thing, I actually leave with one thing. My friends find this deeply unsettling and have staged multiple interventions about it. I am, in every measurable way, a person who likes order, who likes knowing what comes next, who likes the comfort of a life that runs on routine and trust, and the quiet confidence that the people you love are exactly who you think they are. Which is precisely why what happened to my family hit me the way a freight train hits a parked bicycle. I grew up in a warm, sun-filled house in Nashville where the front door was always unlocked, the kitchen always smelled like something good, and Sunday dinners were non-negotiable. My dad, Robert Henderson, is the kind of man who seems almost too good to be real. 60 years old, silver at the temples, laugh lines so deep they look carved. He coached Little League for 11 years despite neither of his kids ever playing baseball. He learned every new neighbor's name within a week. He volunteered at the church food pantry every second Saturday. He called me every single Sunday evening at exactly 7 p.m., never 6:58, never 7:03, for the past 9 years since I moved out. He was my safe place, the person I measured all other trustworthy people against. My mom, Diane, was his perfect, brilliant counterpart. Sharp as a tack, effortlessly funny, the woman who remembered not just your birthday but the birthday of your childhood pet. She had this gift, this almost supernatural gift, for making every single person in a room feel like the most important one there. 35 years of marriage and she and my dad still argued over who got to hold the other's hand first when they walked into a room together. I used to roll my eyes at it. I would give anything to go back and appreciate it properly. Then there was Daniel, my younger brother, 28, lives 20 minutes from my parents, and has been late to every single event in his life including, allegedly, his own birth. He's the one who gets away with everything, charms everyone effortlessly, and somehow still ends up being everyone's favorite person at the party. He's annoying in the way that only deeply lovable people can be annoying. That was my whole world. Small, warm, safe, and completely mine. Every summer without fail, we packed up and headed to my grandparents' old farmhouse just outside of Nashville for the Henderson family reunion. Cousins spilling out of every room, aunts arguing over recipes, uncles falling asleep in lawn chairs by 4 p.m., kids running wild through the backfield until it got dark. It was loud and messy and absolutely, completely my favorite weekend of the entire year. Last summer, my cousin Bethany showed up with a box of DNA testing kits and the enthusiasm of someone who had just invented something. We all laughed, we all swabbed, we all forgot about it by dessert. 23 days later, my entire understanding of my family, of my father, of our history, of the ground I thought I was standing on, collapsed quietly and completely from the inside. And it all started with a notification I almost didn't open. I want you to understand something about the night I got that notification. It was the most ordinary Tuesday evening in the history of ordinary Tuesday evenings. I had come home from work, changed into my oversized university sweatshirt, and the fuzzy socks my mom had given me for Christmas, heated up the pasta I had meal prepped on Sunday, and settled onto my couch with Biscuit's enormous head in my lap and a cooking competition show playing on TV. The kind of night where absolutely nothing happens, and it is perfect precisely because of that. I was not prepared. I want to be very clear about that. There was no gut feeling, no nervous energy, no cinematic sense of foreboding. I was eating pasta and watching a man stress cry over a soufflé. That was my entire emotional reality at 8:47 p.m. on that Tuesday. My phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. I glanced at it the way you glance at your phone when you're comfortable and slightly annoyed at the interruption, one eye barely tilted. It was a notification from the DNA Ancestry app. I remembered vaguely that Bethany had set up accounts for everyone at the reunion and linked them all together. I assumed it was some kind of weekly update email, or maybe a notification that they had processed our results. Something administrative, something boring. I picked up my phone. New DNA match, close family member. I sat up a little straighter. Biscuit lifted his head, annoyed at the disruption of his pillow arrangement. Close family member was an interesting category. I had heard stories about people discovering surprise cousins through these apps, relatives from branches of the family tree that had quietly drifted apart generations ago. I figured it was probably something like that. A cousin we hadn't known about. Some distant connection that would make for a fun conversation at next year's reunion. I tapped the notification. The name on the screen read, Marcus Webb. I didn't recognize it. I ran through my mental catalog of every Henderson and every related family name I had ever heard, every aunt's maiden name, every cousin's married name, every distant relative my grandmother had ever mentioned over holiday dinners. Nothing. Marcus Webb meant absolutely nothing to me. I scrolled down to the relationship prediction. Half-sibling, confidence extremely high. I actually laughed. Out loud, alone in my apartment, with the cooking show still playing in the background. I laughed because my brain's first and most immediate response was that the app had simply made a mistake. Technology glitches. Algorithms get confused. These things happen. I set my phone down and went back to my pasta. I picked it back up 45 seconds later. I opened the match again and stared at the number beneath the relationship category. 1,759 centimorgans of shared DNA. I didn't know exactly what centimorgans were at that point. I want to be honest about that, but there was a little information icon next to the number, and I pressed it, and it explained, in very calm, very matter-of-fact language, that this level of shared DNA was consistent with a half-sibling relationship and was statistically inconsistent with anything more distant than that. I put my pasta on the coffee table and opened a browser. I spent the next 40 minutes going down the deepest research spiral of my entire life. I Googled, can DNA tests get half-sibling results wrong? I Googled, false positives ancestry DNA close family match. I Googled, what does 1759 centimorgans mean? I found forums. I found Reddit threads. I found academic papers I barely understood. I read every single one. Every source said the same thing in different words. At that level of shared DNA, the result was not wrong. I closed every tab. I set my phone face down on the coffee table. I looked at Biscuit, who looked back at me with the serene, uncomplicated expression of a creature who has never once had to worry about paternity secrets. Biscuit, I said out loud to my dog, in my empty apartment at 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. I think Dad has another kid. I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling with Biscuit pressed against my side, his slow, steady breathing the only calm thing in the entire room, while my brain ran the same loop over and over and over like a song stuck on repeat. The name, the number, the relationship category, half-sibling, confidence, extremely high. I picked my phone up 14 times between midnight and 3 a.m. I opened the app. I stared at Marcus Webb's profile. He had a small profile picture, outdoors somewhere, blurry background, just enough detail to make out a face. I couldn't look at it too long. Something about it made my chest feel strange in a way I wasn't ready to examine yet. I put the phone back down 14 times. By 4 a.m., I had mentally drafted 3 different versions of a conversation with my dad, one calm and measured, one where I cried through the whole thing, and one where I said absolutely nothing and just held my phone screen up to his face and waited. By 5 a.m., I had abandoned all 3. By 6 a.m., the sun was starting to come through my curtains, and Biscuit was sitting next to the bed, staring at me with the pointed patience of a dog who would like his breakfast now please. And I realized I had made a decision somewhere in the dark without fully noticing. I was going to my parents' house. That morning, before I talked to anyone else, before I called Daniel, before I breathed a word to my best friend Jess, who would have had 17 opinions before I finished the first sentence, I was going to my dad and I was going to look him in the eye. I checked my mom's book club schedule. Yes, I know, very me. But I needed to talk to my dad alone first, and I needed to know the coast was clear, and I am not even slightly sorry about it. Her book club met on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. It was Wednesday. I fed Biscuit, showered, got in my car, and started driving before I could talk myself out of it. The drive from my apartment to my parents' house is 55 minutes on a good day. That morning, it felt like both 5 minutes and 5 years simultaneously. I didn't listen to music. I didn't put on a podcast. I just drove in complete silence with my hands at 10 and 2, and my thoughts running so loud I could barely hear the road noise. I rehearsed the conversation the entire way there. I would be calm. I would be measured. I would present the information clearly and give him the space to respond. I would not jump to conclusions. I would not accuse. I would simply show him what I had found and let him explain, because surely, there was some explanation I hadn't thought of yet. I almost believed myself. He was in the backyard when I pulled into the driveway. I could see him through the side gate, moving around near the garden with the hose, completely at ease, completely unbothered, wearing the old gray t-shirt he'd owned for approximately 1 million years that my mom had tried to throw away at least 6 times. He looked so completely, infuriatingly normal. So entirely like himself. Like a man with absolutely nothing hiding behind his eyes. I sat in my car in the driveway for 2 full minutes. Then I got out. I walked through the side gate without saying anything. He looked up when he heard it creak, smiled the way he always smiled when I showed up unannounced, that warm, delighted smile that said this is my favorite surprise, and started to say something about how I should have called ahead because my mom had just left and there was nothing good in the fridge. I walked across the grass and sat down on the porch steps. I held my phone out to him without saying a single word. Just the screen, just the name, just the number, just those 2 words in that neat little category box. Half-sibling, confidence extremely high. He glanced at it, the way you glance at something you expect to be ordinary. And then he went completely, utterly still. That stillness told me everything before he said a single word. There was no squinting confusion. No, what am I looking at? No easy laugh and a shake of the head. He simply stopped. Like someone had reached inside him and powered something off. The garden hose kept running, water darkening the soil in a spreading circle neither of us looked at. He turned the hose off. He walked to the porch steps. He sat down next to me. And the man I had trusted more completely than any other person on earth took a slow, long breath and began to dismantle everything I thought I knew about him. He told me about the separation, the brief, quiet few months in 1989 when he and my mom had hit a wall in their young marriage and stepped back from each other. He said it carefully, like he was handling something fragile. He said my mom and he had moved so completely past it, rebuilt so thoroughly that they had never spoken of it to Daniel or me. It had simply become a closed room in the house of their marriage. Locked, wallpapered over. During those months, he had met Sandra Webb in Memphis. It wasn't a long story, he said. It wasn't something he was proud of. It was a lonely man making a desperate, selfish choice during a painful chapter and telling himself it didn't count because the chapter eventually ended. Then Sandra called. She was pregnant. My dad had just reconciled with my mom. Everything he had almost lost was being handed back to him, and he was terrified of losing it again. So he did the thing that frightened, selfish people do when the truth threatens everything they're desperate to keep. He asked Sandra to stay quiet. He promised money. He promised he would make sure the child was provided for even if he couldn't be present. He convinced himself that financial support was the same thing as responsibility. That a check in the mail was the same thing as being a father. He sent money for years, quietly, carefully, through a separate account my mom never knew existed. And then, when Marcus was around 13 years old, even that stopped. He said he didn't have a good reason for it stopping. He said he had told himself so many lies by that point that one more was easy. He had buried it so deep, and for so long that there were entire years where he almost forgot it was real. Almost. Almost is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I sat next to my dad on those porch steps for a very long time after he stopped talking. The garden was quiet. A bird was doing something cheerful and completely inappropriate in the oak tree nearby. The sun was warm on my arms. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't do any of the dramatic things I had half expected myself to do during the 55-minute drive over. I just sat with it. With him. With the strange, hollow, echoing feeling of looking at someone you love and realizing you are also, for the first time, truly seeing them, not the version they carefully presented, but the full complicated human underneath, flaws and failures and buried secrets and all. My dad was not the man I thought he was. He was also still my dad. I didn't know yet what to do with both of those things being true at the same time. Here is something nobody prepares you for when your family gets turned inside out by a secret. You assume, somewhere in the back of your mind, that you have time. That once the initial shock settles and you've had a few days to breathe and process and figure out how to hold all the broken pieces carefully enough that nobody else gets cut, you assume you'll get to control what happens next. You'll decide the timeline. You'll choose who finds out and when and how. You'll manage it. You will not manage it. Because other people are living inside your secret too, and they have their own timelines, their own urgency, their own 34 years of unanswered questions sitting heavy in their chest every single morning when they wake up. I had known the truth about Marcus Webb for 11 days when my mother called me at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and the sound of her voice on the other end of the line stopped my heart completely. I was at my desk at work. I had a half-eaten sandwich next to my keyboard and a spreadsheet open on my screen, and the most normal, unremarkable Thursday afternoon of my life stretching out ahead of me. My phone lit up with my mom's name, and I answered it the way I always answered her calls, automatically, warmly, already smiling before she said anything. She wasn't crying exactly. It was something worse than crying. It was that fractured, barely held together voice that people use when they are trying with every single ounce of their strength not to fall apart before they finish the sentence. "Claire," she said, "there is a man at our front door." I went cold from my scalp to my feet. "He says his name is Marcus," she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Claire, I opened the door and I looked at his face and I already know, don't I?" It wasn't a question. That was the most devastating part. She wasn't asking me to tell her she was wrong. She was asking me to confirm what her own eyes had already told her standing in her own doorway in the middle of a Thursday afternoon that was supposed to be completely ordinary. I was already grabbing my bag and my keys. "Mom, stay on the phone with me. I'm coming right now. Don't just stay on the phone." But the call dropped before I reached my car. I tried calling back 4 times on the drive over. No answer. Each unanswered call felt like a small detonation in my chest. Marcus Webb had driven 4 hours from Memphis that morning. No call ahead. No email. No carefully worded message through the DNA app asking if this would be a convenient time for everyone's lives to change permanently. He had simply gotten in his car at what I later calculated must have been around 8 a.m., pointed himself toward Nashville, and driven. And honestly, the more I came to understand Marcus as a person, the more I understood exactly why he did it that way. When you have spent 34 years carrying the specific, particular loneliness of knowing your father chose his other family over your existence, when you have spent 3 decades wondering what his face looks like up close, whether you walk like him, whether you have his hands, waiting for a convenient appointment time is not something your body is capable of anymore. He needed to go, so he went. My mom had answered the door expecting nobody. She opened it to find a tall, broad-shouldered man standing on her welcome mat in the afternoon sunlight, a man she had never seen before in her life, and yet recognized with a terrible, instantaneous certainty that bypassed every rational thought in her head and went straight to somewhere primal and knowing. Marcus had my dad's jaw. Strong, squared slightly at the corners, the kind of jaw that photographs well and looks distinguished in old age. He had my dad's eyes, that particular deep-set, dark-lashed quality that Daniel had inherited too, and that I had always privately considered the best-looking thing about the Henderson gene pool. He held his shoulders the exact same way my dad held his, slightly squared, effortlessly upright, the posture of a man who takes up his space in the world without apology. My mom is one of the sharpest, most perceptive women I have ever known in my life. She had spent 35 years sleeping next to those features, studying that posture across breakfast tables and holiday dinners and lazy Sunday mornings. She knew what she was looking at before Marcus opened his mouth. She said his name, a question that wasn't really a question, and he nodded. My dad heard voices from inside the house and came to the door. I know what happened next from three sources: from my mom, who told me in pieces over several weeks, from Marcus himself, who described it with a quiet, careful honesty during one of our coffee meetings, and from my neighbor Mrs. Patton, who I am fully convinced has a direct sightline to my parents' front porch from her living room window and has been monitoring it for years as a hobby. Mrs. Patton called me that evening to ask if everything was all right over there, in a tone that made very clear she had seen everything and was simply waiting for the official briefing. My dad stepped onto the porch and came face to face with his son for the first time. They stood there in the afternoon light, two men separated by 34 years and one devastating, cowardly decision, and looked at each other. Really looked. The kind of looking that you can't undo once you've done it, because it crosses a threshold from stranger to something undeniable and permanent. My dad said Marcus's name. Just the name, nothing else. He said it quietly, the way you say something you have been carrying in a locked part of yourself for so long that hearing it out loud in your own voice feels completely surreal. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. His face was calm, not cold, not angry, just still in the way that people are still when they have prepared themselves very thoroughly for something and are now simply living inside it. Then he said, with a steadiness that I think must have cost him enormously, "I just wanted to see your face. I've been wondering about it my whole life." My dad's expression broke open in a way my mom said she had never seen on him before, not dramatically, not loudly, just opened, quietly, like something that had been held shut for decades finally losing the strength to stay closed. My mom walked back inside without a word. She sat down at the kitchen table. She did not move for 2 hours. And my dad stayed on that porch with his son, the son he had paid off and abandoned and buried in silence, and began, in the only way left available to him, to reckon with what 34 years of choosing comfort over truth actually costs. I pulled into the driveway 40 minutes later. The porch was empty by then, but nothing, not the house, not my parents, not my family, not any version of the life I had always taken for granted, would ever look exactly the same again. There are moments in your life that divide cleanly into before and after. Before I got that notification, after. Before my mom opened that door, after. Before Daniel found out, after. I pulled into my parents' driveway 40 minutes after my mom's call dropped and sat in my car for a moment before going inside, not because I was hesitating, but because I needed 3 seconds to prepare my face, to decide what version of myself to walk in with. The scared daughter, or the steady older sister, or the calm, practical, spice rack organizing Claire who handles things. I chose the third one, the way I always do, even when the first two are screaming. The house was too quiet. That was the first thing I noticed walking through the front door. Our house was never quiet. Even empty, it had a kind of warm ambient noise to it, the refrigerator hum, the ceiling fan in the hallway, the particular creak of the third floorboard near the kitchen that had been there since I was 7. But this quiet was different. This was the silence of a house that had just absorbed something enormous and hadn't figured out yet how to keep functioning around it. My mom was at the kitchen table exactly where my dad said she'd been. She had a cup of tea in front of her that had gone completely cold. She was sitting very straight, both hands wrapped around the mug, staring at the middle distance with the expression of a woman whose entire internal world was being quietly reconstructed from the ground up. I sat down across from her. I didn't say anything immediately. I just sat there and let her know she wasn't alone in the room. After a long moment, she looked at me. "You knew," she said, not accusatory, not angry, just a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet precision of a woman who has always been 3 steps ahead of every conversation. "I found out 11 days ago," I told her. "I went to Dad first, alone. I was trying to figure out I was going to tell you, I know," she said simply, and she looked back at her cold tea. That was somehow worse than if she'd been furious with me. My dad came inside about an hour after I arrived. He looked like a man who had just walked through something, not out the other side, just through the middle of it, still carrying all the debris. He sat down at the table with us. Nobody spoke for a while. The three of us just existed in that kitchen together, in that terrible loaded silence, like three people sitting in the wreckage of something trying to remember what it looked like before. My mom stood up eventually, rinsed her cold tea down the sink, and said in a perfectly level voice that she was going to her sister Patricia's house. She said it the way she said everything, with her chin up and her voice steady, and every ounce of her dignity gathered tightly around her like armor. She went upstairs. She packed one bag. She came back down, picked up her keys from the hook by the door where they had lived for 30 years and walked out. My dad sat at the kitchen table and did not move. I stayed another 2 hours. I made actual tea this time, hot tea, and put a cup in front of him and sat there while he stared at it. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that was worth saying yet. Sometimes being present is the only useful thing available, and you just have to do it even when every part of you wants to either fix something or run. I drove home at 8 p.m. I had been awake for nearly 40 hours at that point, and I was running entirely on adrenaline, and the particular grim autopilot that kicks in when your emotions are too large to process in real time, and your body just quietly decides to keep you functional until further notice. I was 20 minutes from my apartment when Daniel called. The moment I heard his voice, I knew. Not because of what he said. He hadn't said anything yet, just my name, Claire, one single word. But the weight in that one word, the specific texture of it, the way it landed somewhere between devastated and furious with a layer of lost underneath both of those things. I knew my mom had called him. "When were you going to tell me?" he said. And there it was. The question I had been dreading since the moment I sat on my parents' porch steps and listened to my dad dismantle everything. The question I didn't have a good answer to because the honest answer was I don't know, and the real answer was I was scared, and neither of those things felt adequate when your little brother is on the phone in pieces. "Daniel, how long have you known Claire?" 11 days. Silence, long enough that I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. 11 days, he repeated, quietly, slowly, like he was turning the number over and finding something ugly on the underside. I pulled off the highway into a gas station parking lot because my hands had started shaking on the steering wheel and I was not going to crash my car on top of everything else. I sat in that parking lot under the fluorescent lights with the engine running and told my little brother the whole story. Everything. The notification, the centimorgans, the drive to the farmhouse, the porch steps, the garden hose, our dad's voice going quiet in a way I had never heard before. Daniel didn't interrupt once. That in itself told me how badly he was hurting. Daniel interrupted everything, always. It was practically his defining characteristic. The silence meant he was somewhere beyond his usual self. Somewhere raw and uncharted. When I finished, he was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, "Does he have a family? Marcus, does he have kids?" I told him yes, a daughter, 4 years old, named Lily. "So we have a niece," Daniel said. His voice cracked exactly once on the last word, and then he pulled it back with the particular stubborn pride of a younger brother who will not cry in front of his older sister if he can possibly help it. "Yeah," I said softly, "we do." We stayed on the phone for another hour. I stayed in that gas station parking lot the entire time, engine running, watching strangers come and go under the fluorescent lights, living their completely ordinary Thursday evenings in blissful ignorance of the Henderson family's entire structural collapse. By the time we hung up, it was nearly 10 p.m. Daniel sounded steadier, still hurt, still lost, but steadier. I drove home. I fed Biscuit. I sat on my bathroom floor for a while because sometimes the bathroom floor is the only honest place in the whole apartment. Then I got up, made my bed even though I was only going to get straight back into it. Because I am who I am and some things don't change even when everything else does, and lay in the dark staring at the ceiling. My mom was at Patricia's house. My dad was alone in a house that had never felt so large. My brother was 20 minutes away, hurting quietly by himself. Somewhere in Memphis, Marcus Webb was living his life, not yet knowing the full magnitude of what his 4-hour drive had set in motion. And I was on my ceiling, doing what I always do, holding all the pieces carefully, trying not to let any of them cut me, and wondering quietly in the dark how in the world we were ever going to put any of this back together. For 2 weeks after Marcus showed up at our door, I did nothing. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I am a person who acts. I am a person who makes lists and solves problems and shows up early and figures things out. Doing nothing is not in my nature, not in my vocabulary, not in my DNA, which feels like a particularly loaded phrase given everything. But for 2 full weeks, I did absolutely nothing about Marcus Webb. I went to work. I fed Biscuit. I had stilted, careful phone calls with my dad who sounded smaller every time I heard his voice. I texted Daniel memes occasionally because that was the only language we had available that didn't require either of us to address the enormous painful thing sitting in the middle of every conversation. I called my mom every evening at 8 p.m., and we talked about everything except the one thing consuming both of us completely: her book club, her sister Patricia's new kitchen renovation, a documentary she had watched, anything that felt like solid ground. I was processing, or at least I was telling myself I was processing. In reality, I think I was simply waiting, for what I couldn't have told you, for the dust to settle, for someone else to make the first move, for some version of clarity to arrive that would tell me exactly what the right thing to do was and how to do it without making anything worse. The clarity did not arrive on its own schedule. It arrived because I was lying in bed on a Sunday night, 2 weeks after everything exploded, and I opened the DNA app almost without thinking about it. The way you open Instagram or your email when you're tired, and your brain wants something to look at without committing to actually feeling anything. Marcus Webb's profile was still there. I stared at his profile picture for a long time. The outdoors photo, the blurry background, the easy laugh caught mid-moment. I had looked at it probably 30 times over the past few weeks, and every time I felt that same complicated pull, part curiosity, part guilt, part something I couldn't name that lived in my sternum and ached quietly. This time, instead of closing the app, I pressed the message button. I sat there for 10 minutes with the cursor blinking before I typed anything. I started 4 different messages and deleted all of them. Too formal, too casual, too apologetic, too much. Finally, I stopped trying to craft the perfect thing and just wrote the true thing instead. Hi Marcus. My name is Claire. I'm Robert's daughter, which I suppose makes me your half-sister, though I'm still getting used to saying that out loud. I don't entirely know why I'm messaging you tonight except that it felt wrong to keep staying quiet. You deserve better than being the secret that everyone in my family is tiptoeing around. I'm not in damage control mode. I'm not reaching out on anyone's behalf. I think you deserve to hear from someone who is genuinely glad you exist. If you ever want coffee, I'll show up. Wherever, whenever, no agenda, just 2 people getting to know each other. I read it back 3 times. Then I held my breath and pressed send before my overthinking brain could stop me. The response came in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, I had barely set my phone down. Claire, I have genuinely been hoping you'd reach out. Yes to coffee, wherever, whenever is perfect. And for what it's worth, I was glad to find you too. I pressed my phone against my chest and stared at my ceiling and felt something loosen in my ribcage that I hadn't even realized had been pulled tight. We settled on a coffee shop called Magnolia Grounds, a small, unhurried place roughly halfway between Nashville and Memphis, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and good light, and no reason to rush. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Neutral ground for 2 strangers who shared 1,759 centimorgans and absolutely nothing else yet. I arrived 22 minutes early. Of course I did. I chose a corner table facing the door so I would see him come in. I ordered a latte I was too nervous to actually drink properly. I rearranged the sugar caddy on the table twice for no reason. I texted Jess, my best friend who at this point knew the full story and had approximately 900 opinions about all of it, and told her where I was and what I was doing. She replied with a string of emojis that communicated both enthusiastic support and barely contained vicarious anxiety, which was exactly right. Then the door opened, and Marcus Webb walked in. I had seen his profile picture. I had seen him described through my mother's fractured phone call. I had constructed a mental image of him from fragments and secondhand accounts. None of it fully prepared me for the specific experience of watching him scan the room, find my face, and walk toward me. He was tall, taller than I expected, with the kind of easy, unhurried stride that belongs to people who are comfortable in their own skin. He was wearing a navy jacket over a simple gray shirt, nothing remarkable, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that immediately reminded me of my dad in a way that made my chest contract. And his face. I had known intellectually that he looked like my dad. My mom had confirmed it from the doorway, but knowing it and sitting 3 feet away from it are two entirely different experiences. He had the jaw, the eyes, the particular way his brow sat that I had seen in family photographs my entire life. But woven through all of it was something else entirely, a softness, a warmth, an openness in his expression that was completely his own. He smiled when he reached the table. It was my dad's smile. I stood up to shake his hand, and then immediately felt ridiculous shaking the hand of my brother, and switched to an awkward half-hug that he thankfully leaned into without making it weird. We both laughed, nervous, relieved laughter, the kind that comes out when you've been braced for something difficult, and the first moment turns out to be human instead. We sat down, we ordered, and then we just talked. He told me about growing up in Memphis with Sandra, his mom, who raised him alone and worked as a hospital administrator, and never once spoke badly about the father who had gone quiet. He said she had always been honest with him, had told him his father's name, had explained that the situation was complicated, had never poisoned the well even when she would have had every right to. I made a mental note, right then, that Sandra Webb was a stronger, more gracious woman than most people would have managed to be. He told me he had always known, intellectually, that his father had another family, had a wife and children who didn't know he existed. He said he had spent most of his 20s actively choosing not to pursue it, not because he didn't want to know, but because he had constructed a life that felt stable and full, and he was afraid that pulling on that particular thread would unravel something he couldn't put back together. Then his daughter Lily was born 4 years ago. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo without me asking, a little girl with wild dark curls and an enormous grin, mid-laugh, clearly in the middle of some deeply important toddler activity. She was wearing rain boots inside, which seemed very on-brand based on everything I would later come to know about Lily Webb. She had the Henderson jaw so clearly, it was almost architectural. She asked me last year where her grandpa was on my side, Marcus said quietly, eyes still on the photo. I didn't have an answer. That was when I decided I needed to stop waiting. I looked at this man across a coffee shop table, this man who had built a whole generous, grounded life on top of a wound that my father had inflicted before he was even old enough to understand wounds, and felt something shift permanently inside me. Not pity, never pity, something closer to recognition. The particular feeling of seeing someone clearly and understanding that the world had been quietly, casually unfair to them for a very long time, and they had responded by becoming someone extraordinary anyway. By the time we looked up, 3 hours had dissolved entirely. The coffee shop had filled and emptied and filled again around us. My latte had gone cold, and I had barely noticed. We walked out to the parking lot in the late morning sun. I hugged him properly this time, no awkwardness, no hesitation, and he hugged me back in the solid, genuine way of someone who doesn't do anything halfway. I cried the entire drive home. Not sad crying, not exactly happy crying either. Something in between, the specific release that comes when something that should have existed all along finally does. I had a brother. I had always had a brother. The world had simply been keeping him from me for 31 years, without asking my permission. And I was done, completely and permanently done, letting it keep him any longer. Let me tell you something about guilt. Real guilt, not the shallow, surface-level guilt of forgetting someone's birthday or saying something thoughtless in an argument, but the deep, structural kind. The kind that lives in the bones. The kind that has been sitting in the same dark corner of a person for 34 years, fed quietly by every Sunday phone call, and every family reunion, and every ordinary Tuesday that passed without confession. That kind of guilt does something to a person over time. It doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them a monster. It makes them smaller. Bit by bit, year by year, choice by choice. It hollows something out from the inside that no amount of little league coaching or neighborly kindness or Sunday morning church attendance can fully replace. I watched it happening to my dad, in real time, after everything came out. He called me every few days. Always in the evenings, always slightly hesitant at the beginning of the call, like he wasn't entirely sure he had the right to dial my number anymore. We talked, about nothing important mostly, about work and biscuit, and the weather and the garden, circling carefully around the enormous thing in the center of every conversation like two people navigating a room with a hole in the floor. But every single call, without fail, somewhere toward the end, he would ask about Marcus. Quietly, carefully, the way you ask about something you want desperately but don't feel entitled to want. How is he doing? Did you talk to him this week? Is he all right? And I would tell him what I knew. That Marcus was well. That he was back in Memphis, teaching his history classes, coaching his debate team, being a present and devoted father to a 4-year-old in rain boots who was currently, according to Marcus's texts, absolutely convinced that butterflies were baby birds, and no amount of gentle scientific correction was making any difference whatsoever. My dad would listen to all of it with a quiet hunger that was painful to hear. Learning about his son's life in small second-hand installments, through his daughter, because he hadn't yet found the courage to reach across the distance himself. It went on like this for 2 months. 2 months of my dad existing in that house alone. My mom was slowly, carefully making her way back, visiting more frequently, staying longer each time, but the full return was still fragile and uncertain. 2 months of him puttering around the garden and coaching nobody's little league, and calling me every few days to ask quietly about the son he was too ashamed to contact directly. I am a patient person by nature. I believe in giving people time and space to find their own way to the right thing. I genuinely do. But I am also a person who has a threshold. On a Sunday evening in October, the same 7 p.m. call, still happening, still as clockwork as ever. My dad asked me for the 11th time how Marcus was doing, and something in me reached its limit quietly and completely. I let him finish the question. Then I put my tea down on my coffee table, and I said, very calmly and very directly, the thing I should have said 6 weeks earlier. Dad, he has a 4-year-old daughter named Lily. She has your mother's hands and your jaw, and she is currently under the impression that butterflies are baby birds. She asked Marcus recently why she doesn't have a grandpa on his side. He didn't have an answer for her. You are calling me every 3 days to ask about your son's life through a second-hand account from your daughter. And I love you completely, and I am not going anywhere. But I need you to hear me right now when I tell you that you are running out of time to stop being a coward. Complete silence on the other end of the line. Long enough that I counted to 12 in my head. Then my dad said, in the quietest voice I had ever heard from him, 2 words. I know. I told him I would arrange it. That he didn't have to figure out the logistics because I knew if I left the logistics to him it would be another 2 months of the same circling. I would find a place, I would pick a date, I would tell Marcus, and all he had to do, the one and only thing required of him, was show up and tell the truth. He agreed without argument. Which told me everything about how ready he actually was. I texted Marcus that same night. I told him my dad wanted to meet. I told him there was no agenda, no script, no expectation of any particular outcome. I told him he could say no, and I would completely understand, and it would not change a single thing between us. I told him I just wanted him to have the choice. He replied in 6 minutes. I've been ready for this my whole life. Tell me when and where. I chose a restaurant called Harlow's, a quiet, unpretentious place on a side street in Nashville that I knew from experience was never crowded on Wednesday lunchtimes. High-backed booths, soft lighting, the kind of ambient noise level that gives people privacy without isolation. A place where difficult conversations could happen without an audience. I arrived first, obviously. I got a booth near the back and sat facing the entrance and ordered sparkling water and tried not to visibly vibrate with anxiety. Marcus arrived next, exactly on time, in a charcoal jacket with the calm, grounded energy of a man who had been preparing for this specific moment for 34 years, and had decided somewhere along the way that, when it finally came, he was going to meet it standing up. We hugged, we sat, we made 2 minutes of small talk about the drive that neither of us was really present for. Then my dad walked in. He looked older than he had 2 months ago. Not dramatically, not in a way a stranger would notice, but I noticed. The particular way grief and guilt and sleepless nights accumulate on a face when there's nowhere left to hide from them. He was wearing his good navy jacket, which told me he had thought carefully about what to wear, which told me everything about how much this moment meant to him. He saw Marcus from across the restaurant. He stopped walking for just a moment, one breath, maybe two, and I watched something move across his face that I don't have a precise word for. Recognition, maybe. Or the specific pain of seeing 34 years of absence made suddenly, undeniably physical and present and real. He crossed the restaurant, he reached the booth, he looked at his son. I slid out from my seat immediately and said I was going to the restroom, the most transparent excuse in the history of human social navigation, and gave them the space that two people doing something this important and this difficult needed. I stood near the restroom doorway for 4 minutes, far enough to give them privacy, close enough that I could see them without hearing. My dad sat down across from Marcus. He didn't reach for the menu. He didn't look around the restaurant. He looked directly at his son with the full, unflinching attention of a man who had decided that the very least he owed was to not look away anymore. He talked for a while. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the shape of them, slow, deliberate, nothing held back. No justifications, no careful lawyerly framing. Just the plain, unvarnished truth of a man accounting for himself fully and honestly for what was probably the first time in 34 years. Marcus listened to every word without interrupting. His face was still, not cold, not closed, just the particular stillness of someone receiving something they have waited a very long time for and want to make sure they take in completely. When my dad finished talking, Marcus leaned forward slightly and said something. I was too far away to hear it, but I saw my dad's face when the words landed. His shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in something closer to the physical sensation of a weight being partially, carefully lifted, not removed, not forgiven away entirely, but shifted just enough to breathe differently. I walked back to the table. Neither of them said anything when I sat back down. We ordered food none of us ate much of. We talked haltingly at first, then more easily, the conversation finding its own awkward, uncertain footing the way new things do. It was not a movie moment. There was no swelling music, no dramatic embrace, no tidy resolution wrapped in a bow. There was just 3 people in a restaurant booth in Nashville on a Wednesday afternoon, choosing with great difficulty and great imperfection to try. And trying, I have come to understand, is the whole thing. Trying is every single thing. I almost didn't organize the reunion this year. I want to be honest about that because I think it would be easy to tell this story with a neat upward arc, crisis, reckoning, resolution, celebration, and leave out the part where, 3 weeks before the date I had always held in my calendar since approximately forever, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the reunion planning document staring back at me and genuinely, seriously considered just sending a message to the family group chat that said, taking a year off. See everyone in 2026, love Claire. Because here is what nobody tells you about the aftermath of a family earthquake. The rebuilding is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It does not happen in a montage. It happens in the smallest, most unglamorous increments imaginable, a phone call that goes slightly better than the last one, a dinner where nobody cries, a Sunday where my mom and dad sit on the back porch together and the silence between them is tired but not hostile. Progress that you can only see if you have been paying very close attention from the very beginning. My mom had come home in February, not with fanfare, not with a grand reconciliation gesture. She simply arrived one afternoon with her overnight bag and her book club tote and stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at my dad for a long moment and said, I am not here because everything is fine. I am here because 35 years means we owe each other the attempt. My dad nodded. He didn't try to hug her immediately. He put the kettle on instead. That is the most romantic thing I have ever witnessed in my life, and I will stand by that. They were in couples counseling every Thursday. It was hard, grinding, unglamorous work, the kind of work that doesn't make for good stories because it consists mostly of two people sitting across from each other in a therapist's office saying true things they would rather not say and hearing true things they would rather not hear. But they kept showing up. Every Thursday without fail. Which, from where I was standing, was its own kind of love. Daniel had found his own way through it in the particular Daniel fashion, which meant approximately 6 weeks of furious silence, followed by a single long conversation with my dad that he has never told me the full contents of, and which I have respected enough not to ask about. What I know is that after that conversation, Daniel started showing up for Sunday dinners again. Still 20 minutes late. Still charming everyone effortlessly. Still the undisputed favorite of every aunt and cousin in the family. Some things survive earthquakes completely intact. Marcus and I had settled into something that felt, increasingly and wonderfully, like an actual sibling relationship. We texted most days, nothing significant usually, just the running commentary of two people who have decided to let each other into the ordinary texture of their lives. He sent me Lily updates with a regularity that I found deeply, unexpectedly moving. Lily had decided she wanted to be a paleontologist. Lily had informed her preschool teacher that clouds were just shy mountains. Lily had somehow acquired a strong opinion about which brand of orange juice was acceptable and would not be moved on the subject. I lived for those texts. So 3 weeks before the reunion date, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my planning document, and I thought about all of it. The year, the damage, the slow, painstaking rebuilding, the new shape of a family that had been cracked open and put back together differently. And I thought about an empty chair at a farmhouse table. And I thought about a 4-year-old girl who had asked her father why she didn't have a grandpa on his side. I opened the planning document. I started typing. And I added one extra chair to the seating arrangement. The morning of the reunion arrived with the particular generous warmth of a Tennessee summer that seems almost deliberately cinematic. Blue sky, soft breeze, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly more beautiful and forgiving than it actually is. I arrived at the farmhouse first. Of course, 30 minutes early with a casserole dish covered in foil, exactly as nature and my personality intended. I helped my grandmother set up the long table on the back lawn, strung the same faded bunting that had hung at every reunion for 20 years, arranged the folding chairs, and tried to behave like a normal person while internally running at approximately 400% emotional capacity. My Aunt Carol arrived with her famous potato salad and immediately began investigating everyone's well-being with the gentle relentlessness of a woman who considers herself the family's unofficial emotional intelligence officer. My Uncle Gary fell asleep in a lawn chair before noon. The cousins' kids were already running wild through the backfield within minutes of arriving. And Bethany, bless her, I genuinely love her, showed up with a pasta salad, and not a single DNA kid in sight, having apparently received my very clear and heartfelt advance communication on the subject. She hugged me and whispered I'm sorry about last year, and I told her she had nothing to be sorry about, and meant about 40% of it. Daniel arrived 18 minutes late, which for Daniel is essentially punctual. He came around the side of the house, spotted me by the table, and gave me the specific look that only younger siblings can give, the one that contains an entire conversation's worth of we've been through something, haven't we, in a single glance. I gave it right back. My parents arrived together. In the same car. My mom's hand in my dad's as they came through the gate, not the effortless, taken-for-granted hand-holding of before, but something more deliberate, more conscious, more chosen. The hand-holding of two people who know now exactly what they almost lost, and are holding on with full awareness of the weight of it. I had to look away for a moment. Then Marcus's car turned into the driveway. He came through the gate with Lily on his hip. She was wearing a yellow dress, and the rain boots, obviously, always the rain boots regardless of weather, occasion, or any known social convention. and she was already scanning the yard with the wide-eyed, focused energy of a child who has arrived somewhere new and is immediately calculating the possibilities. The yard went slightly quieter for a moment. Not uncomfortably, just the natural pause of a group of people adjusting to something new and significant in their midst. Marcus stood just inside the gate and looked across the yard at all of us, at this loud, complicated, imperfect family that was, undeniably and permanently, also his. I walked over to him. I took Lily from his hip because she had already spotted Biscuit across the yard and was making her intentions extremely clear, and I set her down and watched her take off across the grass toward my dog like a tiny yellow comet. Biscuit, who is the most emotionally intelligent creature I have ever met, immediately lay down and allowed himself to be enthusiastically reorganized. I stood next to Marcus and watched her go. "You okay?" I said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the yard, at the table, at the bunting, at the cousins' kids who had already absorbed Lily into their running game with the seamless social efficiency of children who haven't yet learned to make things complicated. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I really am." My grandmother found Marcus on the porch steps before dinner. She is 79 years old, deeply suspicious of technology, and has survived enough of life's complications to be entirely unbothered by one more. She sat down next to him without preamble, looked at his face with the long, unhurried attention of someone matching a person to a memory, and then took both of his hands in hers, those Henderson hands, those long-fingered, unmistakable Henderson hands, and held them. "You have your grandfather's eyes," she said. "I wondered for years where those went." Marcus looked over at me from across the porch. I was already crying. Full tears, not even trying to hold them back, standing there with a bread roll in one hand and absolutely no dignity remaining. He mouthed, "Stop it," at me, which made me cry harder. We ate dinner as the sun went down over the farmhouse, all of us crowded around the long table with its faded bunting and its mismatched chairs and its one extra seat that had always belonged there, that had simply been waiting the way things wait when nobody knows yet to look for them. It was not a perfect evening. It was not a healed family presenting a healed face to the world. It was something messier and realer and more worth having than that. A family that had cracked open, looked honestly at what was inside, grieved what needed grieving, and chosen, with full knowledge of the cost, to keep showing up for each other anyway. Lily fell asleep on Marcus's shoulder before dessert. My dad looked at them from across the table with an expression that will live in my memory for the rest of my life. Later, after the dishes were done and the cousins had gone, and the fireflies were doing their quiet, brilliant thing in the darkening field, I sat on the porch steps, the same porch steps where my dad had told me the truth 14 months ago, and listened to the farmhouse settle around me. Biscuit put his head in my lap. The night was warm and soft, and full of cricket noise. And I thought about something Marcus had said to me once, early on, during one of our coffee shop mornings. I had asked him how he had managed, how he had built such a full, grounded life while carrying the specific weight of being someone's buried secret. He had thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I decided a long time ago that the story I was born into wasn't the same thing as the story I got to live. The first one was someone else's choice. The rest of it is mine." I sat on those porch steps in the warm Tennessee night and let that settle all the way through me. The story we were born into was complicated and imperfect, and marked by a choice made in 1989 that rippled forward 34 years into a Tuesday evening notification that I almost didn't open. But the rest of it, the coffee shop mornings and the rain boots and the grandmother's hands and the extra chair and the deliberate hand-holding and the showing up, always the showing up. That part was ours. Every complicated, imperfect, luminous part of it. Completely and irreversibly ours.